on. So we were having some technical difficulty with the link that was sent out by ASBA earlier. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. And hi, Julie and Chris.
Hi there.
So we'll let you know once we get the other board members online, or once at least we get a quorum, and then we can get started.
That's great. Thanks so much. And I have us live on YouTube right now just to keep it moving along. So when we do get everybody, we can go straight to the work.
Perfect. Thank you.
So we have 8 participants right now, 1 on the phone.
Hello?
Hi there. This is Julie from ASBA. Welcome.
Hi, this is Judy James.
Hi, Judy. How are you?
Okay.
Good. Chris and I are on the phone.
Yes. I'm trying to mute my phone.
I'm going to mute you. I can mute you, Judy. So I'll mute you right now.
Okay. All right.
And Betsy, how many are we waiting for? Where are we at right now?
We have a quorum. I would suggest we start.
Okay. That's good. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Julie Bacon. Sorry for the little bit of confusion that we had this morning. Tonight, apparently I thought we were doing this at 5 a.m. instead of 5 p.m. So when I scheduled it for a.m., which is probably not a great schedule for any of us, frankly. Just sorry about that confusion. And the public, I want you to know that was on us. That was on me. So I do have us streaming on live on YouTube right now, just so you know. And so my name is Julie Bacon, and I am Leadership Development Specialist for the Arizona School Boards Association. I'm also a school board member in a Phoenix area school district, and am serving in my 11th year as a board member. And I'm going to let Chris Thomas introduce himself, and then we can kind of get started.
Sure. Thanks, Julie. My name is Chris Thomas. I know most of you probably from our conferences. I am the General Counsel and Associate Executive Director for ASBA. I've been with ASBA for 22 years and been General Counsel for 21. So I've done a few open meeting law presentations in my day, and I'm sure you've heard a few of them, but I'm looking forward to doing another one for you.
And I think the thing that I always find so amazing, Chris, even though I've heard your presentation many times, I always seem to learn something new. So there's always a tidbit in there that I think, well, that's going to help me as I go forward. So thanks for that. And I'd like to see who all is on right now. So if we could just have each of you, if you're comfortable, just kind of show us your face for a minute. Let us know who you are, how long you've been serving, either as an employee or a board member, so we can kind of have a sense of who's with us.
Hi.
Julie, real quick, before we proceed any further, we do have an agenda before us. So if I could call the meeting to order and go through that process so that we're following our agenda accordingly. So let me get this started, and then Julie, I'll hand it back to you. Okay.
Yeah, please do. And I'm sorry, Mr. Roanhorse, I should have known better. I'm a board member.
That's fine. And good afternoon, everyone. This is Board President Roanhorse. I call this meeting to order. According to the time that I have here, it is now 6:18. Going on to the next item, Dr. Doviash.
Roll call. Ruth?
Mr. Noble?
Here.
Ms. James? Ms.
Julie.
James?
Julie, you probably have to unmute her.
I don't, she's not unmuting, and I don't know why, but she is here. I don't know if you need to hear her voice.
Okay.
Oh,
Mrs.
she's
Begay?
unmuted.
Hello, this is
Ms.
Judy.
James? Okay,
Thanks,
thank you. Mrs. Begay? Mrs. Gorman? Mr. Roanhorse?
Present by Zoom.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we do have a quorum present with us. Dr. Doviash, next item.
Item 3, approval of agenda, discussion and possible action to approve the agenda.
Thank you. Board members, we have an agenda before us. Do I hear a motion to approve?
This is Francis. I motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Noble. Do I hear a
This is
second?
Judy. I second.
Thank you, Board Member James. With that, is there any questions or comments at this time? I hear none. Ruth, call for the vote.
Mr. Noble?
Aye.
Ms. James?
Aye.
Mr. Roanhorse?
Aye. With that, board members, vote carries in approval, 3 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstention. Dr. Dovias, next item.
New business, the Arizona School Board Association will provide a board training on open meeting law and roles and responsibilities.
Thank you, Dr. Dovias. And with that, Julie, I'll give the floor back to you and Chris.
Great. Thank you so much. It looks like we have Ms. Begay is on as well, at least from what I can see. So on what I have here on the Zoom. So just to let you know. So I'm gonna, Chris introduced himself. I just would like to, I introduced myself. I'd like to everybody to kind of get a sense of who's on the call. So that, and I'm just going to go by what I have here, and I can see the first person in my participant list is Miss James. So Judy, would you mind unmuting and telling us how long you've been on the board and just introducing yourself?
Hi. Yes, this is Judy James. This is my 3rd year on the board. I was elected in 2018. 2019, January, I took office, and I felt that I would do the district a great service because of my experience in school finance and my years and years of working with school district policies, procedures, statutes, and other regulations that govern a school district. So, but prior to that, I worked with various school districts as a business manager. So I felt that I was qualified to be on the governing board. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then Ms. Dobiash, if you could just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Betsy Dobiash, and I'm the interim superintendent until July, where I become the superintendent. I've been here 3 years. I started off as director of instructional services, and then I was that and interim principal for a while. And then I became the interim superintendent for the past 1.5 years.
Great, thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Noble?
Yes, good evening. My name is Francis Noble. I just barely started with the school board in January, so going on a couple months here. So Yeah, sorry, I'm on patrol, so I'm just looking all over the place.
That's okay. You're multitasking.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Then I have someone on the call that their name is GUSD stakeholder. I'm not sure who that is, but if you could unmute and just let us know who you are. Well, it looks like that person went away. So, Mr. Roanhorse.
All right, thank you, Julie. My name is Marcarlo Roanhorse. I'm the board president for Ganando Unified School District. I've been a board member for, this will be my second term, so I'll be starting my 5th year this year. So I'm familiar with how our boardmanship functions here, but again, I'm open to learning new things. Thank you for making time for us.
Of course, thank you. And then Ms. Begay is also on. Can you unmute and say hello?
Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Wanda Begay. I just joined. I was having issues getting onto Zoom, but I've been on the board. I believe I'm on my 4th or 5th term of 4 years. I'm not really, I lost count. But what really interested me a while back when I first joined the board was I think the students, and also being a grandparent, a mother, and having so many relatives that our children, grandchildren were attending the school district. So, and there was just an interest. I felt like being a community member, also not only a community member, but also coming from being on a healthcare team there locally, I felt like I needed to come on board with the school, offer my services, and it's been quite a ride. It's been quite a journey. I think I've learned a lot, and also always advocate for children, school children, and also not only that, for parents as well, grandparents. I really think that not every voice gets heard. I really feel that some decisions are made without really going through, without really communicating what is in discussion and the important agendas that we have. So I enjoy being on the board. I know it has been hard. I really miss being there, especially during the pandemic. I wish I could be there, but it's hard. I've had some allergy problems, so I thought I would just stay out this evening. I've just been sneezing a lot and having a lot of upper airway and nasal congestion, so that's why I'm staying out. So, but you're new, Julie Bacon. That sounds very new. It's not the familiar names or faces that I've seen, so you must be new.
Well, I'm a little new. I'm a little new. This is my 3rd year working for the association, but I started in 2014 as the secretary of the board of directors, and then was president of the board of directors of ASBA in 2017. So I've been hanging out a while, but I haven't been employed by the association for that long.
All right, good. Nice to meet you, ma'am.
You too. Thank you. And then Ms. Canuho. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Hi, good evening. My name is Ruth Canuho. I'm the Superintendent Secretary. I have been with the district going on my 10th year, or actually 11th year, but have been with the superintendent's office for 8.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to get started. One of the things that I know that Chris feels this way as well. We consider it a real honor to work with school boards and to be able to help them. We're not, ASBA is not in any way a regulatory agency or an enforcement organization. So our job really is to help you be the best school board that you can be. And we take that seriously, and we really are grateful and honored to be a part of the journey of your school district. So Chris, I'm going to start sharing my screen so that we can start the PowerPoint.
Okay.
And give me a second because, this never works right the first time. Okay, hang on one sec. All right. Can everyone see that now?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, great. You're on, Chris. Just tell me when you want to.
I'll get started. I'll roll. And thanks, Julie, and I'll get started. And what we've been doing with the Zoom calls is, open meeting law presentations. I love to be there in person, and I wish I was there with you today. I'm sure you all wish you were there, and I would love to be able to take questions as I go, because that's usually the best way to do it. But on Zoom calls, I found that it's better to sort of hold the questions till the end, so that we get through all the material and that we don't, because I know we have other things to talk about too. So, but please, that's not to say don't ask your questions. I would love to hear them. Let's just wait till the end of the presentation to do them, if that's okay. So I just also want to say to piggyback on something that Julie said, that yes, ASBA is not a regulatory agency, and all that's true. I would also just double down on that and also say that I'm not, while I am ASBA's lawyer, I'm not your lawyer. And that is that I'm here to sort of give you general legal information. I'm not here to give you legal advice. So if there are specific questions about ongoing issues that you have, I would direct those to your attorney. But having said that, I can answer just about any open meeting law question in sort of a more general approach to it. So, all right. So that, I always like to say that, open meeting law is, fairly complex law, even though it's only, 9 sections of statute. But if you, sort of break it down into pieces, small pieces, it's easy to understand. And so that's what we've tried to do with the 12 rules. So if you know the 12 rules of the open meeting law, you understand how the open meeting law works. And the first thing I would say is that, what's the purpose of the law? The purpose of the law is that it's the public policy of this state to have meetings in the open, where the public can see them and can, for themselves, decide, whether or not their representatives are representing them well. And that when in doubt, the law favors open meetings. The open meeting law applies to all public bodies of the state. Obviously, that includes things like the legislature and state agencies, if they have boards. But it also applies to school boards because we are political subdivisions of the state. The state sets the rules for school districts and their boards. So, understanding why the law exists will help you a lot in terms of applying it. It's a sunshine law, just like with the public records law. And again, it's meant to give the public the opportunity to see the decisions being made on their behalf. Okay, so the second rule is knowing when the law applies. And this is kind of interesting that the way we approach it in law is that we define what a meeting is in the law. And it says, if these elements are in place, you have a meeting within the meaning of the open meeting law, and then all the requirements of the open meeting law apply. So, and those two things that really are required to have a meeting by definition under the open meeting law is that you have a quorum of the public body, and that's defined as a majority of the board, and in which they're discussing or deciding or contemplating deciding anything that could come before the board. Those are the two things. If you have those two things, you have a meeting, and the question then is whether or not you have a legal meeting. So breaking this down, a quorum again means a majority of your board. You have a full 5 board members on your board. Of course, that means 3. The law also applies to any subcommittees of the board. So if the board creates a subcommittee by a motion of the board, or if they have a subcommittee that's been created in policy, maybe if you have a task force or a budget committee or something like that, where the board itself has created that committee. Perhaps they've even placed board members on that committee. If that's the case, then that is a subcommittee of the board that also has to follow the open meeting law. Okay. So, and a quorum can be met, that quorum of majority of board members can be met in any way. It doesn't require 3 people at the same place at the same time. It could be triggered if, you know, like today, we're in different places, but we're interacting over technology such that we are sort of able to have a conversation. That would mean that we have a quorum here. You also can trigger the open meeting law through a series of conversations that add up to a discussion. And we'll sort of get to that when we talk about the email problem of the open meeting law. There's also a requirement that you can't vote by proxy. So you do have to actually physically be there to be able to vote. You know, so what is the discussion part of it? We know what a quorum is. It's basically anything that could come before the board, whether it's discussion, whether it's proposing to take legal action, or deliberating with respect to anything that the board could take action on if they chose to. So it's not something that's on the next agenda. It's not something that you're even planning to do. If it's something that the board could do something about, and you have a quorum of board members discussing that outside of a duly called meeting, that's a violation of the open meeting law. So keep that in mind as we kind of go forward. So that's our second rule. And know that one-way electronic communication by one board member could trigger a violation of the open meeting law. And that happens if one board member emails the rest of the board and says, I learned something about something to do with the school district, and I propose that we do something about that. And they define what that something is. That would be a proposal to a quorum of board members. And even if the quorum of board members does not, respond in any way, that's still a violation of the open meeting law. So one board member could violate the open meeting law. And then obviously there's the email problem that I alluded to before, which is, say the superintendent has sent out an email and they said, okay, here's a rundown of things that are happening in the district, as well as, kind of maybe what's going to be on the next agenda. And if board members respond to that in a fashion that, they hit reply all and they include all the other board members in the discussion, and they start discussing the merits of the things that are on the agenda, or reacting and discussing anything that the superintendent has put out there in terms of information, if enough of you do that, a quorum of you, that could be a violation of the open meeting law as well. So email, just make sure that you are aware of that when you respond to emails. There's also a requirement in the open meeting law where, again, I mentioned that you can string together the quorum requirement without having everybody there at the same time. Well, you could also string together a series of conversations that amount to a quorum. And this is where, one board member talks to a second board member about something, and that in itself is not a violation of the open meeting law. Okay. It only becomes an open meeting law violation if that second board member goes and talks to a third board member about the same subject. And then that's what you've done, is you've strung together a quorum of board members in discussion outside of a public meeting. So you want to avoid that if you can, especially over email, where it's easy to prove that such a thing happened. Second thing I will mention is superintendents, don't feel like the open meeting law precludes you from getting out information about things that are going on in the district. You just need to make sure that you're not securing approval for things outside of a public meeting. There's no polling of the board, but getting out information is a good thing. everybody, all board members having the same information is a good thing. We just don't want to, decide anything or discuss anything by the board outside of the meeting. Okay. And then the board members can't, sort of circumvent this requirement by, directing the staff to communicate, where the board members are communicating through the staff to a quorum of other board members. So in other words, it would be like a board member saying, I really would like to do this, but and I know I can't talk to other, the other boards to board members to find out if they want to do this. Could you talk to them for me? And if you did that and there was a quorum of board members, well, then that'd be a violation for all involved, including the staff member. So next slide. Know that these requirements that I'm mentioning apply to all meetings of the board. And it doesn't matter what you call them. We have study sessions. I think this is a study session today where you're not going to decide anything, but you're learning about something. You can have information sessions, or you can have retreats. You can have regular meetings. You can have special meetings. No matter what you call your meeting, the open meeting law applies to them if you have a quorum of board members. So just understand it doesn't matter what you call your meeting. And what's important about that is I've heard people say, well, it's okay that it wasn't on the agenda because this was a retreat and we weren't deciding anything anyway. Well, it's not okay. You have to still have an agenda that you stick to with all the topics that you're going to talk about on it. Subcommittees, as I mentioned, applies to them. It does not apply to what we call administrative committees. If the superintendent creates a committee that's going to study something and then bring forth a recommendation that's going to go to the superintendent, and then the superintendent ultimately is going to share that with the board, if that's the way the committee was set up, that's not a committee within the meaning of the open meeting law. That's an administrative committee. And as long as the board didn't direct the superintendent to do that, that's the clear distinction. And then remember, it's, the subject matter is not about something that's on a pending agenda, anything that could come before the board. And I say, watch the parking lot. And I know this, especially when I talk to smaller communities, I know that you're going to, talk to each other. You're going to run into each other. Maybe you're going to run into each other at chapter meetings or at, the grocery store or some other place that everybody, comes to fairly often. It's not a violation of the open meeting law for a majority of board members to be somewhere at the same place at the same time. Okay. That's not a problem. Where it's a problem is if you talk about board business when you're there. That's it. Okay. So our third rule is basically the logistic requirements of the open meeting law, which is that, the location for your meetings, the notice that you're going to send out to the public that says we're going to have a meeting. The agenda says, here's what we're going to talk about at that meeting. And then finally, the minutes are, the record of the meeting that already happened. So we'll take these one at a time. And location is basically you can have, your regular meeting should be in a public facility in the district. The public is welcome to attend. It should be large enough to accommodate the public, including anybody who needs, special accommodations to be able to attend and to listen. You can have special meetings that are not on your district premises, but you cannot take legal action at those meetings. So I know it's commonplace for many districts to do a retreat, a summer retreat, and they'll have it someplace, outside of the district. That's okay, but just remember, one, it is a public meeting, so you're still going to have to post it. The public can attend if they want to. And then two, you're not taking any legal action there. You're going to study something. Maybe you're going to talk about your strategic plan, your goals for the next year, something like that. But ultimately, you're going to take whatever comes out of that discussion and then adopt it when you're in the public facility in the district. Okay, so notice, the notice, of course, is saying that we're going to have a meeting, and and you have to post that at least 24 hours in advance. What you also have to do to comply with the notice requirement is state on your website where the notice will be posted, which includes your website, and it should also include at least one physical posting place in the district. That's typically at the district office. And, you know, in districts that have a big area to cover, you know, they may choose to post in other physical locations as well. You just want to be careful about that, because if you say, you know, we're going to post at, you know, every main public place in the district, and there's 5 or 6 different locations, if you've said that that's your official notice and you miss one, well, then you have defective notice for that meeting. So keep it simple in terms of your official notice, and then you can go above and beyond if you want to. And then your written notice has to be given to board members at least 24 hours in advance. And that can be done over email as long as everybody agrees that's the way you're going to do it. Okay, next slide. Your agenda is posted with your notice, and it lists specifically the things you're going to talk about at that meeting. And I don't know, I didn't look at some of your older notices or agendas, but you want to make sure that if you've noticed the public on your agenda that you're just going to get information about something, or you're just going to discuss something, and you haven't noticed them specifically for possible action, that you then cannot take action. You've got to make sure that you know, anything you take action on, you have properly put on the agenda for possible action. Okay. Your agenda items have to be described in a manner that the public can understand what you're talking about. So that seems kind of simple, but it's not so simple, especially when once on the board and school employees, you know, we deal with certain education kind of terms all the time that we just sort of, after a while, sort of take for granted and not understand that, you know, the rest of the world doesn't understand some of these items. So we have to sort of, you know, make it simple. And we have to make it simple so that they can understand, because the public is the audience that the agenda is really for. Okay, so minutes, you also have to have the minutes, and you know, your written minutes have to be contain certain elements, the date, time, and place of the location, who was there and who was not there, a record of how everybody voted. They also have to have a general description of everything that was considered, as well as a very specific description of every legal action proposed, meaning, you know, this board member made the motion to approve, and you state what the motion was. This board member seconded to that motion, and this was the vote, you know, on that motion. So make sure that you call roll call vote to make sure you capture everybody's vote. You know, and board members should vote. They should, you know, vote yes or no. You can recuse yourself, or that's certainly an option for you, but we do urge you to vote whenever possible, yes or no. And then the names of anybody who made presentations should also be in the minutes. There's no requirement under the open meeting law to approve your minutes, but I'll bet you do, and you do because your public or your policy requires that, not because the open meeting law requires it. Your minutes have to be open to public inspection, so within 3 working days. So you know, and if somebody comes within 3 working days, after 3 working days, and said, I'd like to see a copy of your minutes, and you say, you know, well, they're not finished, the board hasn't approved them, you can mark draft and give them a copy of them. You also have to keep a recording. If you base your minutes on a recording, and most boards do, you have to keep that recording a minimum of 6 months, even after the minutes have been approved as the official record. We'll talk about executive session minutes in a little bit. So, okay, we're on our 4th rule. They kind of go a little faster as we go. So this is the first 3 are big ones. The 4th one is that the chair of the meeting should consistently follow basic rules, which is, and we did it this session. You know, you formally call your meeting to order, you follow your board policies, you cover all the items that are on the agenda, and you can always change the order. So what often happens on boards is that, you know, some item that you didn't think was going to be a big issue, you know, you get 20 people that show up that want to talk about that issue. You can move that to up on the agenda so that you know, don't make them wait, which is a good idea. And when you adopt your agenda, that's a good time to offer that amendment, to say, I move that we adopt our agenda with the following change, that item 9 be put in as number 3, and then approve it that way. You can table items without discussion. Of course, the big thing is you can only cover those items that are on the agenda, and you can ask speakers to identify themselves so that they're correctly recorded in the minutes, and then you formally adjourn your meeting. So there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Our fifth rule deals with citizen participation under the law. The open meeting law, it's kind of surprising for a lot of people that aren't familiar with it, which is that, the open meeting law doesn't require citizen participation in meetings. It gives the public the right to attend and to listen, but any public participation that you have in terms of the public being able to make statements before the board in a call to the public, that's up to you. That's up to you in terms of whether it exists. It's up to you in terms of what it looks like. So we'll talk a little bit about what the requirements are. Again, citizen rights under the open meeting law: the right to attend and to listen, to right to record, to video or audio. They have the right to expect you to follow your own rules, and they will call you out if they don't think you're following your own rules as they've been stated. They have the right to address the public body if you allow for it. Okay. Otherwise, there's no right to participate. So you have a couple options here. You can decide, hey, we want to have, we'll allow public comment on any item that appears on the agenda. That's what we call a limited call to public. There are many boards that have that. There are other boards that say, we're not going to limit the public to just commenting on things that appear on the agenda. We're going to allow them to comment on anything that's about going on in the district, even if it's not on the agenda. And that's legitimate if a couple things are at play. One is that that call to the public, that open call to the public, is on the agenda, and two, that next slide, please, Julie. The rules are, of course, that you cannot, if the speaker raises an issue that's not on the agenda, the board members cannot discuss the issue at all, not with themselves and not with the speaker. All they can do is say, they can ask the staff to review the matter. They can suggest that the item be put on a future agenda. And then there's a provision at the end of the call to the public. Say somebody has raised some issue and they've maybe stated some facts that are just incorrect. And instead of allowing the record to reflect that, at the end of the call to the public, you can correct the record and respond to that criticism. You try not to do it in a confrontational way. It's more just in a way to sort of, okay, this is what we understand to be true, unlike what was stated before. So, and again, you can set your rules for how you want to do call the public. But what you should do is make sure that you're setting rules that everybody understands and is fairly applied all the time. You can adopt what we call reasonable time, place, and manner regulations. That's legalese for how you regulate something that's covered under the First Amendment. Because if you create a call to the public, it is covered under the First Amendment to the Constitution. We have freedom of speech, but what we don't have is unregulated speech. Speech can be regulated, and you can say you have 2 minutes to speak and apply that to everybody. That's okay. You can say we are not going to allow for any obscene language. That's a legitimate regulation. You can say we're only going to take comments for 30 minutes so that we can get the other items on the agendas done. That would be legitimate as well. So all of those things are legitimate regulations of what's something that's covered under the First Amendment. What's not okay is you cannot stop somebody because of their viewpoint or content. In other words, if somebody says something negative about the district, that alone is not enough to say, no, you're out of order. As long as they're respectful and they're following the rest of your rules, that may be a comment that's very much protected by the First Amendment. So, and if you violate that and you call them out of order, they could have the basis for a lawsuit. Okay, so superintendent board reports, and this is one of the areas of the open meeting law that I think is the most confusing. I know I have a hard time explaining it sometimes to folks, and what it's for, and what it's really, the open meeting law allows you to do. We've stopped calling these board reports in our policy. I don't know if you've noticed that. We call them summaries of current events because that's what they're intended to be. What happened was many years ago, we went to the legislature and said, there are oftentimes board members and the superintendent would like to give just sort of an update to the rest of the board about things that are happening in the district. They're not things that we're going to talk about and really discuss, but it's just things like, we want to congratulate the volleyball team that went to state and represented us well. Or I attended an ASBA training session. I found it valuable. And if any of you would like to see that information, I'm happy to show you. There's lots of other kinds of examples like that. It's not meant to be a discussion amongst, and in fact, it cannot be a discussion by the board. And it's not meant to be terribly substantive. They're more like for things like recognitions and things like that. So these ought to be short, they ought to be sweet, and they ought to be, and you ought to know the rules, because if the issue is not on the agenda stated specifically, the board cannot discuss it in any way. They cannot ask clarifying questions. They cannot take action on it. The only way it can be discussed by the board is if the item is specifically listed on the agenda. Okay, this is really important. And so what it's not is, it's not, the opportunity to be, I think, have long conversations or long, monologues about what's going on, what you find that you like in the district or what you find you don't like in the district. That's really not what the intent for these are. And they can get out of hand if that's how they're treated. So that's why you need to understand what the rules are for these kind of reports. And also to understand that it's only the superintendent or board members that can do it. Others cannot do it. So next slide, please. So board reports, pitfalls to avoid. So make sure it's like the kind of things that I mentioned, things that don't foster a lot of discussion. If you know about something that you do want to talk about that you think will be foster discussion or people want more information about, ask that it be put on the agenda in its own right. That will give you flexibility to answer questions. There's no discussion. Again, the other thing is that, if you find out, hey, that's an interesting thing, I'd love to talk about that more. Let's get that on another agenda so we can talk about that. That's legitimate. Okay. So I want to go back to one other thing real quick, Julie, and that is to mention, and I didn't talk about this with regard to, the notice of meetings and things. Obviously you have to have a notice when you have a regular meeting, but what often boards will do is they will also notice the public when a majority of board members may be somewhere, but it's not going to be a board meeting. It's what we call a soft posting. And it's meant to let the public know, hey, we understand what the rules are. And oftentimes there'll be a list of different activities, athletic events, student activities, different kinds of meetings that board members may attend, and a quorum of board members may attend, but they're not going to discuss any board business with themselves. Okay. So soft posting is a good idea. But what you need to understand is all that is it's not a meeting. Just because you put it as a soft posting, it does not mean you can have a meeting. Okay. You're basically noticing that it's not a meeting. All right. So any questions about that? We can talk about that at the end, but I know that that's confusing for some folks. So next one, executive session. So we'll go into about the executive sessions. This is, but we'll start with a definition, which is that an executive session is when a quorum of board members of the board meet in a meeting where the public's been excluded. And why has the public been excluded? Because it meets some public purpose. The legislature has said, hey, it makes sense to not have the public there because, the public interest is being, served by doing it that way. But you need to understand that, it has to fit into one of these reasons, one of the 9 authorized reasons, and all procedures have to be met in order to have it. So next slide, please. The procedural requirements are first that you think of an executive session as a meeting within a meeting. Typically, you call the meeting to order, and then you can motion to go into an executive session for the legal basis that you have on the agenda. And then a majority of those those board members that are there, if they vote to go into that executive session and you've got a quorum, then you can have the executive session. But you need to make sure, and this is for the superintendent and the superintendent, the board secretary, it's really, really important to make sure that double check that statutory notice that you put on the agenda. Make sure you're using the right one, and that you've described it in such a way that puts the public on notice what you're doing, but it also doesn't defeat the purpose of why you're doing it. During the executive session, this is a question I get a lot. Who ought to be in the executive session? Well, certainly the board members, typically the superintendent as well. And I would urge you to have, almost all your board sessions with your superintendent there. The only exception that I carve out for that is sometimes during the evaluation process, board members will want to have a conversation with just themselves before they bring the superintendent in to have a further conversation. What's important is that everybody is reminded each and every time you have an executive session that what happens in the executive session is confidential and cannot be disclosed to anyone at any time. All right. And most importantly is you can't take any legal action in executive session. So, even if you discuss something and then you have to take action on that, then you have to motion to go into open session to actually take that vote in open session. So, and after, as I mentioned, after the executive session, you should take that vote in open session, and you can also ratify instructions that you gave in the executive session, because the open meeting law does allow you to instruct somebody on your behalf with regard to, if you're involved in a lawsuit or some sort of settlement discussions, or if you're going to be doing a meet and confer with your employee organizations, or if you're looking to buy property or sell property or even lease property. All of that you can give direction to your negotiating representative in executive session, and many boards find it useful to actually ratify that instruction in open session to just make sure it's that much cleaner. And then you continue with the remainder of your meeting after the executive session concludes. So the 9 authorized reasons for an executive session are these, and you see them before you. One is to talk about employee matters, and that's by far, I believe, the most common one that you deal with on a school board. To get legal advice from your attorney, probably number 2. And then to talk about records that may be exempt from public inspection. You find this with employee evaluations or certainly student data. That has to be confidential by state or federal law. If you're involved in any kind of contract negotiations or pending litigation, if you're giving instructions to a negotiating representative. And here's one that comes up, I'll bet, a lot in your area, which is that international or interstate negotiations, because you may have discussions going on with the tribal government. And so it's fine to have those discussions and about negotiations in an executive session. Purchase, sale, or lease of real property. And the couple that were added last year, school safety operations, plans or programs, and security plans or systems. And what that school safety operations was like things that that you do to keep your students safe. Evacuation plans, emergency response plans, those kind of things that you would want to. It makes no sense to have that discussion in public because that compromises their safety. So the legislature allows us now to talk about that in executive session. So next, just a couple notes about the most common executive sessions that you deal with. The employee matters. You can't have a generic employee matters executive session. It's got to be to discuss an identified person, an employee. So in other words, if you were talking about reducing custodians from 5 to 3 for budget cuts, that's not an executive session discussion. That's an open session discussion. Now, if you were talking about the job performance of a particular custodian, that would be an employee matter discussion, executive session. And if that custodian is going to be discussed in executive session, they have to be delivered written notice at least 24 hours prior to the executive session. They can decide that they want that discussion in public if they want. And if they do, I would call your lawyer right away. Okay. Just to make sure that, you know, you're doing things the right way. Otherwise, the employee doesn't have a right to attend the executive session, but you could invite the employee to attend. Again, I would only do so after getting legal advice. And then the employee, though, does have the right to review the minutes after the executive session. Superintendent evaluations, as I mentioned before, often done in executive session. Make sure that what you're talking about with regard to superintendent evaluation in executive session is based on the superintendent's personal performance. It's not some long conversation about whether the district is attaining certain goals and programs. Those should be done in open session, the big picture stuff. And legal advice. This is really important. My guess is you probably, you know, sometimes you have your attorney there, but more often you probably have your attorney by phone. And say you've gotten, you know, you're having an executive session for legal advice. You call up your attorney, you get the advice. That the basis for that executive session is over once the attorney is no longer on the phone. You can't talk about what you heard or have other questions, you know, if the lawyer's not there. So you have to make sure, unless you've got another posted reason for having the executive session. And then your negotiating representative exception for executive sessions, you make sure that you're just focusing just on the areas that you need to give instruction on, and you're not using, you know, having some broad discussion about, you know, budgets and things like that, that again should be in open session. Okay, next slide. And your executive session minutes. Okay, first of all, you have to have them. Okay. Secondly, they're confidential. They're not, you know, distributed like the regular minutes are. They're usually kept under district office, and they're kept separately from your regular minutes. They have to contain the date, time, and location you had the executive session, what persons were there, and then a general description of all matters considered, including an accurate description of any instructions given. Who gets to see the executive session minutes? Well, any member of the public body can see it, as well as the employee that was subject of the discussion, or if there's an audit or investigation of some sort. But what you want to make sure is that those minutes are still kept in the district office. I would not circulate those in any way over email or anything like that. If anybody wants to review the executive session minutes, they should come to the district office to see them.
And Chris, I just want to clarify, when you say the public body, you mean the governing board?
Yeah, where I'm saying public body, I am talking board. I'm talking about school board. The open.
I get confused about that sometimes.
Yeah. So yeah, public body is the term that the open meeting law uses, which is why I use it here. But yeah, whenever you see public body, that equals school board for our context. Okay. So if you're going to have a student deal with a student disciplinary matter, that is done in executive session. And you saw that the 9 authorized reasons it wasn't in that list. It's because it's not part of the open meeting law. It's part of the education code, Title 15, but it's still done in an executive session. And why? Because student privacy is the most important, and parent privacy is the most important. So it's a little different because if you're, say, doing a discussion about a promotion decision where a parent has maybe appealed a promotion decision that has been made at the school, then you know that can be done in an executive session. The parent can request a public meeting if they want to, and the parent has the right to attend that, and the teacher has a right also to attend that. And if that's the issue, it's promotion retention. But if it's a student disciplinary issues, next slide, please. If it's about a long-term suspension or expulsion, which is really expulsions are just about all you know, boards deal with. Typically, the hearing officer who heard the case has made a recommendation. It's come to the board, and the board's going to react to the recommendation. If that's the case, then you know the parent has the right to be noticed that it's going to be discussed in the executive session. The parent has the right to say, I want it in an open session, and the parent has the right to attend and to record and to review the minutes. Excuse me. The board can meet in an emergency session. And this is emergency session is basically a meeting of the board where you had to respond to something quickly and you couldn't because you couldn't post the normal 24-hour notice. So say something happens, you have a big storm and you have to approve some contracts to repair some things. That would be a fair reason to do that. But what you have a couple things. First of all, I would call your lawyer right away. They'll help work, go through it. But you post the notice in the agenda as soon as you can. You discuss why you couldn't meet the normal 24-hour notice requirements at the meeting. You put those, in the minutes, and then you post the details of the emergency within 24 hours. So last year when COVID hit, there were many boards that were meeting under emergency provisions because you had to react really quickly to close your schools. So legal action taken in violation of the open meeting law is void. Say somebody says, you know what, you took action on something that was either not properly described or not even on the agenda. And I'm alleging a violation of the open meeting law, and they filed that with the Attorney General's office. And you become aware that they filed this, okay? Instead of waiting for the Attorney General to act, which could take months, what you might want to do is, first of all, call your lawyer. And if your lawyer says, well, we don't think it's a violation of the open meeting law, but it could be, I don't know how the AG is going to act. Why don't you ratify this? And so that, because if it ultimately is found that you violated the open meeting law, it's as though you never made this decision. But, we obviously had to approve this contract. So why don't we ratify it? We'll go through the process and we will say that this ratification was based on a prior action, and we'll put that in the minutes and we'll cover all of our bases. That's what you want to do, because once you are on notice of a violation could have occurred, you only have 30 days to do that. Okay, so keep that in mind. Next slide. And then we just talk about what the violations are. The penalties. It's a $500 fine per violation, plus the attorney's fees for knowingly aiding or agreeing to aid or attempting to aid anybody in violation of the open meeting law. And it says $2,500 fine for a second offense. There is sort of a get out of jail free card. So if you're the one board member who says, I think we're violating the open meeting law, and you point of order and you're overruled, you have a couple of options. One, you could leave the meeting, or you can say, I think we're violating the open meeting law. I'd like that put in the minutes. And if you do any of those things, and there ultimately is a violation of the open meeting law found, well, they've put in the law that they're going to look favorably upon that. You may be the one person who sort of gets off the hook for these fines that I'm talking about. And then we've had, courts and the Attorney General's office actually remove, it was a full board about 22 years ago in the Phoenix area. So the open meeting law is something to be taken seriously. We do trainings of this. I think this is probably, I don't know, my 17th, I think, of the year so far. So it's why we talk about it so much, because it is serious, and everybody needs to understand these are what the rules are that we have to work with. So with that, I am, again, I just one little caution. I'm not your attorney. I am ASBA's attorney, but I can kind of answer some general questions. And if I think you need specific legal advice, I will tell you that you need to call somebody. So you have some great attorneys working up there in Northern Arizona. And happy to take questions.
If you have a question, it might be helpful to show us your camera so that we can just see that you have one, or unmute so that we can see that as well.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Board members, is there any questions at this time? Okay, so I don't hear any. Chris, I was wondering if we could go back to your presentation, page 23.
Sure.
What was on? I can't see the numbers of it. What was it on?
It's under rule number 7, board reports.
Okay.
Okay, go back forward one. Okay, right there. So I just wanted to know if you could elaborate a little bit more on the last bullet there that says only a board member or superintendent can give reports without listing items on the agenda.
Sure.
Can
Okay.
you go a little more in depth?
Yeah, you bet. So we've carved out this exception in the open meeting law that is really kind of remarkable, that allows a board member or a superintendent to talk about something in a one-way, report that's not on the agenda. It's sort of a unique exception to the open meeting law. But we also have other kinds of reports that we deal with all the time, which is, you might get a budget report or a transportation report or a report from your principals or a report, there's any number of different kinds of reports that you may get that you'll hear. What I'm saying is that for those kinds of reports, they don't fit into this category of the exception. For those kinds of reports, they have to satisfy the normal requirements to be on the agenda and to sufficiently describe what is going to be discussed. So it's, in other words, it's not enough to say, transportation report if what you're going to talk about is changing bus routes, or that you're going to purchase two or thinking about purchasing 2 new buses. Something like that you'd have to put on the agenda, transportation report, and then bullet underneath possible purchase of new buses, possible change to bus routes, so that you put the public on notice, especially if like a bus route, that's a big thing, especially in a rural area. Like, I need to know. So if I see that on the agenda, I can decide if I want to attend that meeting and maybe give my input if they allow me. For other kinds of reports, other than board members or superintendents, just remember you have to still meet the standard of putting your public on notice of what you're going to talk about.
I think you're still muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it.
Sure.
One last question. So you're talking you're using the transportation report as an example. Let's say on the agenda it's listed as transportation report, would we be able to discuss or question items on an agenda if it's just listed as transportation report?
Well, so you're limited to the items that appear on the agenda and anything directly related to it. So let's say it was a transportation report and those 2 items that were bulleted underneath were, changing bus routes and what did I else say? Purchase of buses. Okay. And somebody wants to talk about recruitment of bus drivers, which relates to transportation, but is directly not on point. You're going to have to create a close connection in order for it to be legitimate and follow the open meeting law. For instance, if in the discussion about the bus routes, you're talking about eliminating certain bus routes, and somebody makes the point, well, we would have, we wouldn't have to do this if we hired another bus driver. Okay. If you say that, and I say that's directly related, I think you're okay there. Where you might not say is, somebody responds to that comment and says, well, we would be able to get another bus driver if we change the qualifications. If we just change the qualifications, we'd be able to get another bus driver. Well, and then you have a discussion about the qualifications for bus driver. Now you've kind of walked to a subject that's really not related to the agenda item. Okay. So I know it's more of an art than a science. But it's one of those things where as long as it's directly related to what's on the agenda, you're good. But if you've kind of bird walked over a couple spots, then you're not going to be covered under the open meeting law anymore.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Sure.
So I have a question though.
Sure.
It's listed like not bulleted items. It's listed like transportation report, security report, maintenance report. Then would it just mean they can't discuss it at all, or would it mean it's carte blanche, they can discuss anything?
I would want to see more details,
Mhm.
you know, on the agenda. I would want to see that it lists out specifically, you know, some broad topics that were going to be potentially part of that report.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Doviash.
Mark
Board
Carlos,
members, any other questions?
yes, I have a question.
Judy, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. I am just thinking about when we receive or we list on our agenda reports from department heads, you know, principals, supervisors, directors, and a lot of that. Well, one area specifically is the director of business services, and we as board members are tasked with responsibilities of making sure that we're how do you say, we're following compliance and things of that nature. And so would we be able to question, you know, like something that was presented to us a couple of months ago or 3 months ago in a report, like an audit report, and you know we have questions going back to that. Would that be also not permitted?
Not the way you're describing it. You'd have to have it on that night's agenda. It'd have to be specific on that night's agenda. Just the fact that you have somebody who's the director of business services in front of you does not give you, you know, the ability to reach back to previous meetings and ask them questions about what they presented in the past. You'd have to have something, you know, on that night's agenda about that. Now, if I'm a board member and say I get my packet and it's, you know, I got 4 or 5 days before, you know, the meeting, and I want to raise that issue, I would call the superintendent or board president and say, you know, I want to ask this question. Can we get this on the agenda? Now, that's not to say it's going to get on the agenda, because it still has to go through your BEDBA, you know, agenda setting policy. But that's the only way that I could see that you would actually be able to talk about that.
Okay. Okay. So it would. All right then. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Judy, for that question. Board colleagues, any other questions? Okay, I hear none with that. Julie and Chris, I'll give it back to you.
Great. This is where I take the part of my relay race, and I'm going to hand the baton to Julie, who's going to talk about roles and responsibilities. Julie, are you there? I think you're muted.
I am now. I was muted. Okay, let me go forward in the PowerPoint a little bit. I'm going to go all the way through what Chris did again. I just really appreciate Chris's expertise when we're talking about things, because there's so many components to being on a board that, so I really appreciate that. So Chris, thanks as always for that, that presentation. So the part that we're going to talk about now is roles and responsibilities. And as part of that, we always talk about the 8 characteristics of effective boards, because we think it's important that boards understand what makes you effective. And there's actually research on that. And so we'll go over that in the course of this presentation, and then talk a little bit about policy that's governing school boards. And if you saw on Chris's slide deck, there were references to your board policies on almost every slide, so that where the law intersects with the policy, we named that, or he put the name in there for you, so you can see where those connect. And so first, this is a question that we ask lots of board members, and you're going to have to unmute yourself and yell out what you think the answer is. So how many bosses does a superintendent have?
One body.
5.
1, 5.
1.
Yep. So those are both very common answers. The real answer is 1, because you only really have power in a quorum of members, as Chris just talked about during the open meeting law presentation, in a properly noticed meeting. So while the superintendent has one boss, that's not to say that the superintendent doesn't have a big job in managing the 5 personalities that are on this board. So it is not uncommon to think, yeah, they have 5 bosses, because certainly all of you, when you do your superintendent evaluation, put your perspective into that, and then you come up with a document that is a consensus document that you all agree to as part of the evaluation. And then the next question is, what is the authority of an individual school board member? Go ahead and you can
None.
shout that out again. Yeah, nothing. None, really. There's no individual power in what we do, or at least no more than any other citizen has in your school district. The thing that I always talk about, though, is there is that perception of power that happens when you become an elected official. And so people may look at you as if you have power, when individually you really don't. So when you go to if you go to a school to visit, you know, in the legal sense, have no more power than anybody else who's at that school to visit. Now, people might perceive you having a lot more power than that, and teachers and your staff may see you differently. So that's just something I'd like you to think about when you when you're on campuses and talking with people. What's the authority of the governing board as a whole? And that's really a no-brainer. It's a lot. We have a lot of work to do. We have, lots of responsibility, and it's up to us to, take that seriously. So Title 15 is where all of the duties, this is where the statute is that lists the responsibilities of the governing board. And as Chris mentioned, we are a public body or a political subdivision of the state. And we only have power granted to us by state statute, either expressed or implied. So if you want to have some good, nighttime reading, if you have a little insomnia, maybe you'll want to go in and look at those laws. But it's 15.341 and 15.342. And then you can see there also the policy reference to what are our responsibilities as school board members. And so while a board has oversight function, the day-to-day operations of the district and the requirements of statute are taken care of by your employees, by your superintendent or the person who's been designated by the superintendent. And the only duties that are clearly not delegable, in other words, these are the things you absolutely have to do as a board, is approve policy, pass a budget, and the personnel issues related to the superintendent. So that's the hiring, firing, and evaluating of the superintendent. Those are the only things that you cannot give to someone else, delegate to someone else. And there's often confusion around this concept that we do approve. Boards do approve everybody that is hired by the school district. But for that process, the board oversees it it's not part of the process. We're not part of the people in the process. But when you hire a superintendent, the board is very much part of the process in hiring the superintendent. So that's just a qualification that I want you to think about too. So throughout this, we're going to have a few different scenarios that you may or may not have seen before, depending on whether you've come to any of our events. But here's one, and an oversight would be an appropriate use or appropriate thing for a board member to do. Overstep is something that the board member's just gone a little bit too far, a little bit outside of their roles and responsibilities. So here's a scenario that a board member posts a question on Facebook asking for input on a high school teacher's behavior actions. She posts that her daughter is upset with the way the teacher runs the classroom and wants to know if others are having the same concern. She shows all the comments to the superintendent and wants something to be done. This is, again, hard over Zoom, but if you unmute yourself and tell me whether you think that's an oversight or an overstep.
Overstep.
Yeah, overstep.
That'll be overstep.
Yeah, this is something that if you're hearing concerns, it's not inappropriate to talk to the superintendent about the concerns that you're hearing, but to solicit on Facebook, in social media, and then also, going to the superintendent and saying something has to change. Again, that's not the job of the board. That's the job of the person who supervises that teacher, to go ahead and discuss concerns with the teacher. So that's one of the oversight, overstep. So here's kind of another tool that we use, a visual graphic representation of the way that this governance team, the school board, and the administration, teachers, and staff interact. And so you have on the governance side, the what needs to happen. And then on the administrative side, where the superintendent and the employee side, you have how is that supposed to happen? How is that going to happen? And in between, you have goals and success indicators. This is where your strategic plan comes in really handy, if you have one of those, because it really helps the board stay aligned with the big picture that we're supposed to be observing and having an impact on. So this is just another way to put it. We just keep reinforcing everything, but the board's role is to govern. Again, you have the hiring and performance management functions of the superintendent. And with the support of staff, you set direction, you approve the budget, and you monitor progress towards the goals. And you're accountable to the community. And the way that you will know whether the community likes what you're doing or doesn't like what you're doing is, will you be reelected? That's really the measure by which you can tell whether voters are pleased with the way that you are functioning as a board member. The superintendent's job is to manage, so overseeing the day-to-day operations of the district. And again, I don't want to imply that you won't hear issues about the day-to-day operations of the district, but your job is not to solve the problems that people bring to you. And this was, I have to say, really, really hard for me as a person, because my background is in social work. I am really about helping people. That's just my nature. It's just who I am. And so it was difficult for me to have to say to people, I can't solve that problem for you, but I can direct you on where to go to get that problem solved. So just so you know that. The superintendent implements policies and establishes the plans, and the superintendent's accountable to the board. And so if you're not happy with your superintendent, then the way that you would talk to your superintendent about that is during a performance evaluation, just like any employee would do, any supervisor would do with any employee. Okay, so here is an oversight and another oversight overstep. A board member comes in to meet with the superintendent. The board member is adamant that the district adopt a new math curriculum. His brother teaches this curriculum in a nearby district and is just really excited about the materials and thinks, the board member thinks that the board should approve this and adopt these materials. So notwithstanding all of the legal requirements of a curriculum adoption, which are significant, this is something that we would consider an overstep, because you cannot, as an individual board member, direct what's going to happen day to day in a school district. Now, can you have impact on the curriculum that is selected? Yes, when it's brought to you to vote on, you can ask questions about that curriculum. You can review that curriculum before you vote on it. There's all sorts of ways that you can get questions answered about curriculum, but it's just not, this is what we should do. That's really not what the board, not what board work is. And again, here's another kind of visual representation of the roles and responsibilities. The board really is in charge of setting that strategic plan, setting strategic goals for the district, and then adopting policies to help execute those goals and strategic directives. The superintendent and the employees would develop the plans, implement the plans, monitor progress, and then you would evaluate the results, either at the culmination of something or while the actual project is happening. And that's why there's that dotted line in between, because there may be times that you're talking about things that are going on, so that you can have status updates or progress updates on certain things that the board has set a goal around. So here's another one of oversight or overstep. During a board meeting, several members have questions about expenditures that were in the budget they improved, including the purchase of new technology for the high school. Board members are curious about how the money was spent, and they want to make sure teachers are getting professional development on the new technology so that they will know how to utilize the materials in their classrooms. So does this seem like an oversight or an overstep?
Oversight.
Oversight. Yep, exactly. Because this is our job. Part of our job is to make sure that the resources that we allocate to improve student achievement in our school districts are being used wisely. We do have a responsibility to the taxpayer for the money that they contribute to the students' education in our school districts. So we need to make sure that what we're buying is being utilized appropriately, and that we're providing whatever support and resources teachers need or our staff needs to fully implement anything that we've purchased with taxpayer dollars. So what we do know from lots of different sources, these particular bullets are from the National School Boards Association's Key Works of School Boards, would say published in or updated in 2015. School systems suffer when either the superintendent or the board members attempt to overtake the responsibilities of the other. So if board members are getting into operations, then that's not going to help the district. If the superintendent is doing board work, that's not going to help the district either. So there's a responsibility for us to, what we would sometimes refer to as stay in our lane. We're moving in the same direction, we're on parallel paths, but we have different responsibilities in the way that we execute some of these things. And involvement with administration and operations distracts from the essential functions of planning, policy development, and promoting the strategic goals and student achievement. And we often use the phrase inform for superintendents. Superintendents should inform board members, but not involve them in the operational issues. Doesn't mean you shouldn't know about them, but it does mean you shouldn't get involved in them. Positive relationships. this is, I would suspect that this is one of the most difficult relationships that you have to do, because a board really is one voice, and you don't get to choose who you sit on a board with. Other people choose that for you. So I often talk about it like a family. Like, you don't get to choose who your in-laws are, or you do get to choose who your in-laws are, but you don't get to choose who, like, I didn't get to choose my sister-in-law. My brother just brought her on. So you got to figure out a way to work together. So it's really important that you do a number of things. And we talk frequently about assuming positive intent. Even when you don't agree with a board member, assume that where they're coming from is positive, and that they really are focused on what's best for the students in the school district. Acknowledge that they have a point of view, even if you disagree with it. Because we all want that. We all want our perspective to be acknowledged as just that, our perspective. I think it helps sometimes to identify where board members are coming from and what their real focus is. And I'll give you an example of this. On the school board that I serve on, we have one board member who really she's just started her 5th term on the board. And her focus really is on reading and phonics. That is her main goal. She's really devoted and committed to making sure that students are reading at grade level by 3rd grade. And so it helps to know that, because then I can understand the perspectives from where she's coming. And there are for myself, I'm a social worker by nature. I'm by training. I'm a helper by nature. I really believe that it's difficult for students to achieve if the social emotional issues that they are facing are not addressed. So that's kind of my perspective, where I come from and where my key values are. You can build relationship capital through those kind of more informal conversations and communication with board members. And sometimes that happens organically, if we ever get to meet in person again as a board, just having those conversations about what you do this weekend, or, I saw your son the other day when I was at the grocery store, whatever that is, but building up that relationship capital through, positive intention and wanting to make sure, and positive interactions, making sure that you're connected with your fellow board members, and then creating opportunities to communicate, to talk through things. Being in a board meeting and talking through things is pretty formal. And so I commend you for what you're doing tonight, having a meeting where the opportunity is to just talk and to get to know and to learn together. That's a really key part of successful boards, is the learning together. And so we'll go on to the 8 characteristics of effective boards. And this is the source that we use. We talk about this a lot with many different boards and in many different ways. But the findings were that districts where boards demonstrated certain characteristics saw better student achievement. And they reviewed studies, numerous studies on what effective school boards look like. And then they came up with these 8 characteristics as a result of the research that they did. Again, NSBA has a key works of school boards, and this is the 5 components that really focus in on student achievement. ASBA has a board self-evaluation, and the pillars in that are here: the structure, vision, conduct and ethics, accountability, and advocacy. Those are directly aligned with the 8 characteristics of effective boards. So as we're going through this, I want you to think, and as we read the slides, what are our strengths and where do we have opportunities to improve? So I just want you all to think about that as, your board and moving forward. Where are there opportunities to improve? And And let's celebrate what you do really well, because that's important. So the first characteristic is you commit to a vision of high expectations for student achievement, quality instruction, and you define clear goals toward that vision. That is a really important piece of the work that boards do. It is hard to get to a certain place if you don't know where that place is. So you got to name that vision. You have to make that kind of strategic plan for how you're going to get to where you want to be. The second one is you have strong shared beliefs and values about what's possible for students and their ability to learn, and of the system that you have and its ability to teach children, all children, at high levels. This is one of those situations where sometimes you'll hear, well, we have this happening in our school district, so this is why we can't get to a certain place. This is really about every adult in the system believing that every single student can achieve and can achieve at high levels. And so that kind of shared vision and shared understanding of what students can do, and the belief in the employees that you have that they can get them there, is really important, and for every single adult in the system to understand that. And the board sets that tone for the rest of the school district. You are the role model, whether you want to be or not, you are. And so that's something to think about as well. So the third characteristic is you're accountability driven, spending less time, I would argue almost no time, on operational issues and more time focused on policies to improve student achievement. And so this is where, when you're looking at your data, what can we do to help the demographic groups that are not achieving at the levels that we would like? Let's take a deep dive into our disaggregated data and look at, what parts of our student population aren't getting the results that we believe are possible. And so looking at your data, really taking a deep dive into data, and often people talk about, graduation rates. So if you look at your overall graduation rate, maybe it's 85%. Well, that means 15% of students are not graduating. And so let's figure out, who are those 15% of people, and figure out how we can address the needs that they have so that they can also be successful. You have a collaborative relationship with staff and the community, establish strong communication structures to inform and engage both internal and external stakeholders in setting and achieving district goals. And you'll see that we're not talking about having strong communication structure so that boards can be involved in the operations of the district. This is really getting your whole community on the same page about where you want to go. What is the goal that we have for our students, and how can everyone in the community help us reach that goal? And so thinking about this from a non-operational perspective, I want to warn that. And in high achieving districts, there are boards who could say, this is, when we did our strategic plan, we had 15 community meetings, or we had one survey, and we had 4 different focus groups when we were talking about how we were going to set up our strategic plan. So, and making sure that you're getting you're including every demographic of your population. So not just parents. What about students? What about community leaders in your community? What about business owners in your community? What about taxpayers in your community? So lots of different people to get that feedback from and to engage in setting the priorities for the school district. The fifth one is boards are data savvy. They embrace and monitor data, even when the information is negative, and use it to drive continuous improvement. And I always say to boards that you're a brave board when you lay yourself vulnerable and talk about data that is not good, because that's really the only way to improve that. So we just want to make sure that boards are looking at their data and they're not hiding what isn't working, rather looking for ways to improve if something's not working. Effective school boards align and sustain resources such as professional development to meet district goals. So this is professional development, but there's also that concept of where you align your budget, where your budget resources are going is what your priorities are. So if you have specific district goals about moving student achievement forward, your budget should really mirror that, so that the resources that are needed to get you to that place are available to staff and students as they're trying to reach that goal. Effective boards lead as a united front with the superintendent, each from their respective roles, with strong collaboration and mutual trust. Now, this does not mean that you all have to get along all the time, 100% of the time. What this means is that you have, mutual trust in one another. You are willing to listen to one another. You're willing to collaborate. You're willing to talk about different ways of achieving the things that you'd like to achieve, even if not everybody gets their way. Setting that vision should be done collaboratively with the superintendent, because they're the person who's going to be executing and implementing everything that needs to be done to reach those goals. Effective school boards take part in team development, often with their superintendent, to build shared knowledge, values, and commitments for their improvement. So again, this is kudos to you for doing what you're doing today. And I know we have another training scheduled in May. And those are really important things to do, so that there's a common understanding and a collective efficacy around what it is that boards do and what you want to do. So I didn't know if anyone would want to just kind of talk about what are our strengths and where are our opportunities in terms of those 8 characteristics. Is there anything that came to mind immediately?
Okay. I think, well, for me, I feel that the board likes to utilize data to make judgment. And I think that's probably one of our strengths as a board.
Okay, great. One of the things that we talk about a lot with data is to use data as a flashlight, not a hammer. So looking at data is not meant to punish people, but it's meant to illuminate the path ahead and ways to move forward and keeping in that continuous improvement cycle. Ms. Begay, did you have something?
Yes, I wanted to say that I think one of our strengths is that we have 5 members on the board. I also know that some school districts have 3 members, but we do have, I know at one point, Mercury, our school president, was the only male representative. Now we have 2 gentlemen and 3 ladies.
Yeah, you do want your board.
We do have representation from there, having 2 young gentlemen, and then I know us ladies are pretty much up in age. However, I feel that as a strength, just a combination of knowledge and also experience. I don't see.
It's a little bit hard to hear you.
Right, we're not getting enough data. I would like to see more data to
Ms. Begay?
organizations are successful if they are data driven, if they have a lot of information at hand to base their decision.
Great, thank you. It was a little hard to hear you for a little bit, but I think
I don't know why I can't really hear you guys too. I've been playing around with my volume all the way up, but I can't really hear you.
Okay. Anybody else? Anything that jumps out at you as something that's a strength or an opportunity? Okay, so let's keep moving along then. Policy governing school boards. So board policies are the law of the land, and Chris is still with us. So if there's any specific questions about policy, he can answer them. So where does the policy come from? We provide model policies, which are compliance-based. And so what the law requires is what's in our model policies. And we provide those to you for districts to adopt. You certainly can alter language if you want to, but if you do that, please have them reviewed by your legal counsel if that's something that you do. And once the policy is adopted and voted on by the board, it's your policy, regardless of who provided the language. So it's not ASBA's policy anymore, it's Ganado's policy. So that's just something to think about. And here's just some quick examples of policies on board governance. And the policy manual is broken out alphabetically, and the B section of the policies is really where the board's most focused in terms of the things that the board needs to be most concerned with. So I'd encourage you to get familiar with the B section of your policies. Not that the others aren't important, they are absolutely important, but I think this is where board members would go most to look up what their job is as a school board member. One of the items included in the B section of your policy manual is the code of ethics for school board members. And I don't have obviously a handout for you because I'm not with you physically, but what I will do is when I put together a summary of the training and the things that we talked about for the board and the superintendent, I'll include the code of ethics so that you can see that for yourselves. And some of the key points of that are, because there's very little recourse for board members who are, quote unquote, behaving badly. Adherence to policy and board norms is really important. And if you don't have a set of board expectations or board norms, that's something you might want to think about. It allows the board to talk together about what they believe are the best practices for your board in terms of professionalism and functioning, and how you're going to function as a board. So we would recommend board norms, and that's something that my school board does every year. We developed board norms probably 5 or 6 years ago, and we look at them annually at our board retreat that we hold in June of every year, and review them and say, do they still apply? Is there anything we need to add? Then we bring them to a regular board meeting. We review them publicly. We vote on approving them, and then we sign them. And then that's placed on our website so that everyone can see these are the expectations that we hold ourselves to. And we talked earlier about ASBA not being the boss of school districts. We are not. We are here to support your operations and to provide support to school board members. And at the bottom here, it says, remember always that my first and greatest concern must be the educational welfare of the students attending public schools. And this is the last item in the code of ethics. And I think the most important in many ways, because that is what we're here for. Our job is student achievement and making sure students are as successful as they can possibly be in the confines of our system. Board self-evaluation, I'm not going to really talk about this too much. This is something that the board will be doing, and I will be helping with the training in May around board self-evaluation. But we know it's a best practice for highly effective boards, really looking at your professionalism, the way the board is running, is an important piece to improvement. Just like evaluation is an important piece to improving an employee's performance, this gives the board the opportunity to take a look at their own performance. And again, these are the 5 pillars that we talk about: conduct and ethics, vision, structure, accountability, and advocacy. So in the board self-evaluation, there are those 5 pillars, and then there's questions within the evaluation, and then there are benchmark questions as well. So it's a pretty extensive process to go through, and I think it really helps boards come to consensus around the things that they would like to work on as a board, as a body. So just to review, school boards play a significant role in outcomes for students. There are characteristics of effective boards and ineffective boards. Effective boards are ones that positively impact student achievement and ensure that students have the resources they need to be successful. Your policies guide board member action, and board self-evaluation and a focus on continuous improvement, not just of your students, but also of the board, is a best practice. And so then I am also now done and am happy to answer any questions and anything that you need.
Okay. Thank you, Julie, for that presentation. Board colleagues, do I hear anybody with questions, comments? Any closing remarks? Well, oh,
I do actually. This is Wanda. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
I just want to thank Julie for giving us a refresher course on our roles and responsibilities as governing body members, and also Mr. Thomas for his presentation as well. I think we need refreshers every now and then to remind us of our roles and what we do as governing body members. So I just want to thank Julie and Mr. Thomas for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Wanda. Colleagues?
Yeah, my colleagues, Francis.
Go ahead.
I'd like to thank Julie and Tom for putting up this training. As a new board member, this is very informational and insightful. So learned a lot these past 2 hours. So now I know what the role of a board member is. So thank you.
Thank you, Francis. Judy?
Hi. Yes, thank you, Board President, and thank you, Julie, for that presentation. And I know Mr. Thomas is probably not on with us, but thank him also for reviewing that, the OML for us again. And just to encourage my colleagues to keep up the training so that we're accountable and serve the community that elected us. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Dr. Doviash?
I would like to say thank you for presenting, and also thank you for meeting with me on phone a number of times beforehand so that we could help cover what we thought should be covered, make sure things were appropriately posted and such. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I know that one of the things, I think Chris talked about it, but the soft posting was a question. And if there are any more questions about that, you know, you can call our office anytime, whether it is, you know, the superintendent, the board secretary, if you have questions about posting and how to do that, our policy team and Chris are really good at answering questions, and that's part of our job. So I want to just encourage you to do that. And I know Chris is still on with us, and I know I speak for him as well when I say thank you for letting us come into your world and work with you as a board. And I will see you again in May. Chris, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, thanks. It's great it's a pleasure to talk to your board, and can't wait to get up there again because it's a beautiful country. So see you down the road sometime.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank
thank you, Julie and Chris. I appreciate it. And also board colleagues, yeah, thank you for making the time. And also our administration, Dr. Doviash, and also Ruth. Thank you for making the time to go through this training with us. For me, I'm just very humbled to know that we're able to come together and work on our professional development as a board, and you know, to work together as a team, as a family. And that's the intent of these hosting these trainings here. And so I thank you so much. And I know we're all very busy individuals. We have various backgrounds. But again, I'm very thankful that you're able to make the time to be here, and just in the efforts to improve our district, improve ourselves as a governing body. And so, yeah, thank you guys. And thank you, Julie and Chris. I do appreciate your time. It is valued. I will say that. And if there's any evaluations that we would have to, that you would like the board to do, go ahead and send it to our administration and they'll get it out to our board.
Thank you.
With that, thank you. So that, Julie, does that conclude the training for this evening?
It does. That's all we have for you.
Okay, well, thank you. With that, board colleagues, we are at the conclusion of our open meeting law and roles and responsibilities training. Can I get a motion to accept the training?
My motion is, Francis, to accept.
Thank you, Mr. Noble. Do I hear a second? Is there a second?
This is Judy. I second that.
Okay, thank you, board clerk. With that, we have a motion and a second. Ruth can call for the vote.
Mr. Noble,
Aye.
Miss James,
Aye.
Mrs. Begay, Mrs. Begay, Mrs. Begay, Mr. Roanhorse.
Aye. With that, board colleagues, motion carries in approval, 3 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstention. Going on to the next item. Dr. Doviash?
Adjournment.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you,
This
Judy.
is Judy.
Do I hear a second?
This is Francis, I second.
Motion has been seconded by Mr. Noble. With that, board members, all those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you, board colleagues. The ayes have it. And thank you all. You guys have a good evening. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.